Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. This is David Applebaum from IT Service Architects. Today, joining us is Michael DePalma from Datto. He is going to be running a webinar for us called "How Much Would a Day of Downtime Cost Your Business?" Michael and I have been collaborating on this webinar for a bit of time and wanted to provide our clients and others within our network some of the best information that we can find on business continuity. And hopefully by the end of this quick half hour, that's what you'll walk away with. At the end of the webinar, we'll be talking very briefly about contacting us to get a free evaluation and maybe help you put together a business continuity plan. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael DePalma. Well, there he is. Well, you certainly are eye candy, Michael.
I appreciate that. So my name is Mike DePalma. I'm the Senior Channel Development Manager for Datto. So we do backup disaster recovery. My role is a little unique in that all I do are educational webinars similar to this. And I've been fortunate enough to sit alongside some folks from the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, some state agencies. So as we walk through some of the threats that are out there and some of the different ways these criminals are getting through, a lot of times they're coming directly from the government. Very briefly about Datto. So I mentioned we're a business continuity provider based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. So we're just about 40 miles east of Manhattan. For the entrepreneurs on the call, it is a very cool story. Our founder started this company about 14 years ago when he was 22. Started to build these little backup devices by hand out of his parents' basement, selling them online through managed service providers. And you fast forward to the fall of last year, and we went public. We're now a publicly traded company. You can look us up. Our ticker symbol is MSP. So pretty exciting stuff, kind of that basement to billion story. You could look them up. Awesome Accord. It's pretty cool. So approaching 2,000 employees worldwide, and we protect over an exabyte of data in our 9 data centers. It's one of the largest private data centers in the world. We've got 2 here in the States, 1 in Pennsylvania, 1 out in Utah. Any information you'd like about Datto, obviously reach out to David and his team, and they can get you that information. But to set the stage a little bit about what we're going to talk about, I'm kind of a history nerd. I usually am on the road 3-4 days a week, and I'm a lot of time in the hotel room watching history documentaries and reading books and stuff like that. My wife makes fun of me all the time. But to try to put where we are in the context, you could look at the course of human history, and there's always these eras, right? Whether it's the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Industrial Revolution. And what all of these things have in common is there was some sort of technological advancement that propelled us all forward, right? You fast forward 1,000 years from now, they're going to look back at the time we're living in, and they're going to say, clearly, this is the digital transformation age. And thank goodness we're living in this age, because how would we have been able to stay productive over the last 12 months without all these great collaboration tools and the ability to work remote and all the rest? Now, the problem is with every single phase of our human history, there have been bad actors on the other side exploiting those same technologies. And we're seeing that now. And these guys are really opportunistic. If you were following the news, I mean, within weeks of the pandemic really getting traction, there were emails coming out that looked like they were from the CDC, World Health Organization. Hey, click here if you have these symptoms, how many cases in your area. And they were malicious emails. And they look really good nowadays. When we talk about these spear phishing attacks, I mean, they look really good. And it just shows you how opportunistic and how quickly they could exploit any one of these problems. Now, ransomware specifically has seen a huge uptick. And you see the stories in the news, the big sensational stories, whether it's a hospital or a municipality or Fortune 500 company. But the reality is the vast majority of these attacks are happening at the small, the medium-sized business community. I will use a story that is a kind of a sensationalized story because we get real numbers. The theme here is how much would a day of downtime cost? Well, City of Baltimore got hit with ransomware back in 2019. They were asked for what was essentially about $75,000 in Bitcoin. Now, if you're not familiar with Bitcoin, online cryptocurrency, it's gained a lot of traction. For the most part, these criminals are always going to ask for the money in Bitcoin because it's so hard for the government to go track it back to them. Now, the government says you're not supposed to pay the ransom. City of Baltimore says, hey, we've got this big, robust IT team, big budget, we'll be able to recover all of our data. So they don't pay the ransom. Story comes out about a month later that this attack had actually cost them $18 million. And that's in the cost of downtime. It's in the cost of data that they were not able to recover. And so this is the math that the criminals always want to put you in a situation to do, whether it's pay $10,000 in ransom as a small business or go ahead and try to recover your data. And call me in a week when you're still not back up into production, when now, hey, you want to get this data back? Now it's $20,000. And so the downtime is really the impact that we're seeing. And so I mentioned the government, they've been saying don't pay the ransom for various reasons. You don't want to embolden these folks. It puts a bigger bullseye on your back. It's kind of the bully in the cafeteria type situation. You pay once, they're going to keep coming back until you stop paying. But finally, they put out an official statement back in October. The Treasury Department put out a statement that said that not only should you not pay, if you do pay, you're at risk of being in violation of the law. And the reason behind that is a lot of times, unfortunately, the folks that are behind these attacks, they're not the guy in his basement anymore. They are oftentimes terrorist organizations, foreign enemy nation states that if you were to pay that ransom, you're inadvertently funding these terrorist organizations, which obviously is in violation of the law. Now, this doesn't have a lot of teeth to it yet because, again, they asked for that money in Bitcoin, and it's really difficult to find out where that money is going. But you can see the direction that the government is taking. They are putting the onus on the business community to say, you've got to protect your data. You cannot pay the ransom because if you do, we're going to come knocking on your door. And I only think they're going to get more aggressive on that. Now, back to the city of Baltimore. So they go and they remediate that problem, $18 million. You fast forward to this year, around Thanksgiving time, their school system got hit with ransomware. And that's because they remediated the problem, but they didn't put measures in place to make sure it didn't happen again. And so the criminals knew that, and they say, hey, we got through one, so now let's try to hit their school system, because they probably didn't do those upgrades there. So it shows you, hey, again, they're going to keep coming back, that bigger bullseye on your back. Now, when you look at who we're up against, I mentioned, it's no longer the folks in their basement anymore. It is a lot of times kind of a corporate structure. There are developers out there developing new variants of all of these, malicious attacks every single day. And a lot of times they're just selling that off on the dark web. And then it's to that next layer, which I would call the sales team. The sales team goes out and they try to, infect as many businesses as possible. And then even a lot of times they have tech support. There will be a pop-up that says, hey, you don't have a Bitcoin account? Don't worry. We'll walk you right through how to set one of those things up. So there are places on Earth right now where people go into work, they put their tie on, they sit down at their desk, they do attacks all day long, they punch out, they go home, they have dinner with their families. It's a job like anything else. And, we're only seeing an uptick because there's so much money to be made with so little risk of being caught. Now, we do see insider threats as well. A lot of times these are at the enterprise level, but we did see that kind of move down market. The thought process there is mostly because, there were a lot of layoffs and disgruntled folks who were very worried about their economic situation. They might have been stealing some things on the way out. I did a panel discussion with an attorney out of Pennsylvania who only focuses on cybercrime, and they have seen an uptick in that. We do see organized crime. We think of the Sopranos and, Goodfellas and all the rest. That's not what these guys are doing now. Again, they're going to follow the money. If there's a lot of money to be made with very little risk of getting caught, organized crime is going to get their hands on that, both here in the States, Europe, Russia, China, all around the world. Again, the opportunistic nature of those folks. Enemy nation states, you talk to the government, they will say, hey, we can put all the sanctions we want on these countries, on these organizations. They're going to find ways to get money, and cyber attacks is one of those ways that they do that. And then the Internet of Things piece of where we are right now. I mean, first thing I do in the morning, hey, Alexa, what's the weather going to be today? Thank goodness. I love that technology, right? But I'll give you a little homework assignment. You want to go look up an interesting story. The greatest casino heist ever perpetrated was a few years back on a casino out in Vegas. These criminals were able to find a vulnerability in the internet-connected fish tank thermometer and gain access to their network and extract all of the personal and financial information for all the high rollers of that casino, information that's worth millions. And so it shows you that's how crime is done now. There's not guys in costumes or sneaking through elevator shafts. They're doing it at the cyber level. We put together every single year a ransomware report because this is the world that we live in. And basically, we've seen the trends continue to uptick. You could see last year, healthcare was the community that was hit the hardest. Again, that's because there was so much pressure on the healthcare community that if they were getting hit, that most likely they were paying, because as a hospital, you cannot be down for several days, especially during a pandemic. But what you see here is every single industry is vulnerable. They don't care. The beauty of ransomware on the criminal side is, it used to be, the big companies would get attacked because, there's very valuable information and they can go sell off. With ransomware, for the most part, they're just encrypting your data and holding it hostage. And they don't care what that data is, because they know, again, go to that history timeline, we're in the digital transformation age. It doesn't matter if you're a one-man nonprofit or a Fortune 500 company, you can't operate nowadays without access to your data. And that's why they get so many folks to pay. I mentioned the healthcare community. We saw another one down in Maryland. There was actually an article that came out that there were 4 major hospitals that were hit with ransomware. They didn't publicize it because, they wanted to keep it private, but, there was a huge attack on that. The way they're getting through, nothing too surprising. Still phishing emails. Now, it's not the email from your long-lost uncle promising to make you a millionaire in his will. These guys, when you hear the phrase socially engineered spear phishing attacks, they're going to do some research about you up front in your business. So when that email comes in, it's going to look like it comes from a vendor, maybe somebody that you worked for previously. All that information we freely give on LinkedIn and Facebook. So they could do a little bit of homework to make that email look and feel exactly like every other email in your inbox. There's a lot of great products out there to make sure that these folks don't get through. But of the folks that got attacked, just about 6 in 10 of them had anti-malware in place. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have it. You definitely should, but it shows you that you really do need a multi-layered approach. When you approach cyber security and cyber resiliency, this is not something you go buy off the shelf and say, hey, we made an investment in cybersecurity. It really is something that it's an ongoing process. That's why I highly encourage you to do that assessment after this webinar. When we talk about the impacts, again, it goes back to that $18 million number. It's loss of business productivity. It's that business-threatening downtime. FEMA had a study 2 years ago now where they said that 60% of businesses that go down for a week or more never reopen their doors. Now, they were looking at it in terms of natural disasters, but downtime is downtime. When we look at the actual data behind it within our report, I can remember reporting on the stats from 2018 and saying, hey, look, the average ransomware payment's only $4,300. But you know what? The average impact is 10 times higher than that. Look at where those numbers have gone. The number that they're asking for, it has not drastically increased. But you look at North America, the average cost of downtime, and this is just in the small business community, over $300,000. So you start to look at, can my business absorb something like this? I mentioned I do a bunch of presentations with governmental agencies. I did one recently with an FBI agent down in Houston, and they're very strict about not sharing their slide decks. You can't take pictures of them, but he said the number freely, so I don't mind sharing it. Their number for the average length of downtime from a ransomware attack is 16.2 days. So start to put that in context of whether you can absorb that and what the cost of that will be for every hour that you're down, day, week. Can you absorb that? That's where this $300,000 number comes from. And the scariest number, but the number that the criminals love best, is that only 3 in 10 of the small business owners we talked about were very concerned about ransomware. Despite all of the scary numbers that are out there, the fact that it's a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, 30% of small business owners are highly concerned about that. That means the criminals don't have to change what they're doing at all. It's working. They'll just go and they'll find. They know that 7 out of 10 of these folks aren't putting systems in place. And so that's a scary stat. And I kind of take it as a personal offense because all I do, again, are these educational webinars. Clearly, I'm not doing a great job at it, but hopefully that number starts to increase. But the focus here, again, is on the downtime aspect of it. And, we could acronym you to death here on any kind of tech webinar, but the 2 ones that you definitely need to be able to answer, because these are the 2 acronyms that these criminals are exploiting, are your RPO and your RTO. Now, your RPO is the easier one to answer. That's the left-hand side of your screen. That's basically saying, how much data are you at risk of losing at any given time? So simply put, how often you're taking your backups. You're backing up daily. You're saying to yourself, okay, we can lose a day's worth of data, and that might be fine. Everybody is different. Some people need an RPO goal of an hour, sometimes even shorter than that. For the most part, businesses feel relatively comfortable about that. I bet you if I asked you guys offline, what's your RPO, you can tell me how often you're taking backups. hopefully you are taking backups, but most of the folks are, and the criminals know this. So that's their first piece of leverage. If they attack you and you don't know, if you don't have backing up your data, then you've got no other recourse but to pay or close your doors. But they know a lot of folks are backing up their data. It's the right-hand side of the screen that makes this a multi-billion-dollar industry. That's your recovery time objective. Great, you have a backup, right? That backup is only as good as how quickly you can restore that backup. And so would it take you a day to get your data back, a week? Would it be in that 16.2 day range? That's the question we need to answer. And you need to be able to say, okay, if systems go down, how long would it take me to get into a true production environment so that all of my employees are back up and running, and then we could figure out what's going on in the back end. What business continuity does is it's really shifted what backup looks like, and we're seeing a huge growth in this. And what this does is it's saying, well, backup doesn't just need to be backing up files and folders, the traditional kind of commoditized backup. What business continuity does is it takes a snapshot of that entire server. So it's capturing all the files and servers and all those volumes, but also the operating system, all the applications. Everything that lives on that server is now mirrored over there. You'd set up a schedule, like we mentioned, to talk about your RPO, and within this, because we've got the image base and we're just taking backups of those block level changes, all of those backup points are independent of one another. So if you are hit with ransomware at 11 o'clock, there's no risk of previous backups being impacted. So now, what this gives us the ability to do is, since we have all of the operating systems, the applications, we could spin up what's called a virtual machine right from that on-premise device or even from the data centers. And what this means is, okay, somebody on your team, they click on an email they're not supposed to, they get the scary red screen that says, oh, everything's encrypted, pay me some money. Your first reaction now is not to say, all right, let's go restore this data, let's put a new server in place and go restore this data. Instead, your first reaction would be, okay, let's call up David, and I need to get back up online. So they're going to spin up that virtual machine, and now everybody within your organization has access to everything they would have had on that server. It's a true production environment. For the most part, if it's happening locally, your employees don't even know that's occurred. And now you can go in and do some forensics on that infected device, and you could be in this virtualized state for several hours, several days, weeks even. And you're taking active backups are in this state. So when now you do have that new piece of hardware in place, or that old infected server has been wiped clean, you can get all of that data back, and get the data back not when the attack occurred, but instead when you were ready to make that restoration happen. So you've got all of those changes that were made while you were in this state. And you can start that restoration while you're still in this virtualized state. So you're now talking about closing that downtime from days or weeks to minutes or hours to spin up this machine. And you can have multiple servers running off of this. So again, this is all about reducing downtime. This is actually another line I stole from this one was from a general from the Department of Homeland Security. They don't ever endorse any product or anything like that, but they do talk a lot about business continuity. And what they'll say is it really takes a ransomware attack and turns it into an inconvenience as opposed to one of those business threatening events. And that's what this is all about. Being able to answer that RTO and RPO question. All the backups are tested. The virtualization capabilities are tested every single night as well. So at the end of the day, when you go and you do that assessment, you can come out of that with a comfortable feeling of, here's my RPO, hopefully it's aggressive enough, here's my RTO. And this is how long I'll be down if something were to occur, and is this something that I can absorb? And that's a question you have to answer. And maybe whatever you have now is perfect and meets those goals. It's always good to get a second set of eyes on that. And then all of these cool virtualization capabilities can occur either on that on-premise device or from those geo-redundant data centers. Because maybe it's not an attack, maybe it's a fire or flood, or we see what's happened during hurricane season. It felt like it was never going to end. You saw what happened in down in Texas recently. You saw what happened with Hurricane Sandy up here in the Northeast. I mean, that was our biggest test. Again, we're right along Long Island Sound. There were thousands of business as usual out of those data centers. So this is the type of thing you need to really think about. Now, the last thing is all the shift to these, SaaS applications, the Microsoft 365s and the G Suites of the world. And, again, thank goodness for these products. This is how we've been able to interact and have meetings and collaborate on all of our projects that we're working on, conferencing. I'm sure, I used to be on the phone all the time. Now it's set up a Zoom meeting, set up a Teams meeting. That's just the world we live in. And even as we get back to the sense of new normalcy, we're going to still be out using these applications. This is the new reality. So if you're frustrated by it, you get used to it. So what about this, right? This data is safe. We're talking about Microsoft or G Suite. Within our report, we found that over 60% of the managed service providers that we talked to had clients that were attacked. They're off their Microsoft 365. Dropbox was being attacked. G Suite. We are seeing these attacks occur, and you could find stories about it. I mean, Google search, Microsoft 365. There are attacks happening here. I talked about the opportunistic nature of these criminals. They will find the data. As the data starts to sprawl out, and they will find ways to go and get it. Now, the vast majority of attacks still occur on on-premise Windows-based servers. That doesn't mean that they necessarily can't get into the other systems. There's just most of the data lives on on-premise Windows-based servers. So they're gonna keep bleeding that dry until that dries up. And as the data moves to these SaaS applications, they're gonna find ways to go get that. And we saw a huge spike, obviously, in the usage of this, and it's been great. But most of the time, what they're trying to do is, again, exploit that human error. 91% of downtime and data loss occurs because of user error. Normally not one of those malicious internal threats, but somebody clicking on an email they're not supposed to. And we've seen an uptick because of this kind of work from anywhere environment. When you're sitting in your kitchen, you're more apt to let your guard down. You're more apt to go on Facebook than you would if you're in your office or at your cubicle. You see something suspicious, instead of poking your head up and asking a colleague, hey, did you get this email as well? You probably click on it, because you don't have that instant access. And so the point of all this is this data needs to be backed up. Wherever that data lives, you need to take an inventory of it and say, okay, does everybody have access to what they need? And then is that data backed up? Because Microsoft 365 and G Suite, they both have what's called the shared responsibility model. And I've been up to Microsoft's East Coast headquarters up in Burlington, Massachusetts, and sat on panels with folks from Microsoft. They will flat out talk about the shared responsibility model. Yes, they're going to protect the integrity of their cloud, but that data that lives within it, that is the responsibility of the tenant, of you, whoever manages that account. And they will tell you that you bear responsibility. And even within their user agreements or on their forums, they'll openly say that they don't have any liability of that deletion of that data. G Suite, essentially the same language. They're going to talk about it. And they will talk about the need to back that data up on a third party. And I'll give you a second homework assignment. Google a guy named Kevin Mitnick. If you don't know him, it's a pretty fascinating story. Back in the 90s, he was the most notorious hacker in the world. And he was FBI's most wanted list. The FBI caught him in a very high-profile arrest. He went to jail. He came out kind of in a catch me if you can style story. He works with the good guys now, works with the government, works with managed service providers to show some gaps that need to be filled. And he created a live virus called Ransom Cloud. And we actually hired him to come to our annual Datto conference every year. And he stood on stage with a live virus. This wasn't a theoretical, this is what it might look like. This is a good hacker. And he created this virus. And he sat on stage in front of 3,000 folks with 2 laptops, and he showed how it would work. And it was honestly within 2 minutes. And the email comes in like this, you just sit through a webinar, you have to, be diligent, but look at this, it's Anti-Spam Pro. I got to update this. It looks pretty legit. And so you click on the accept button, and what happens? Every single email is now encrypted. And oh, by the way, if you have admin access, you run the risk of the entire domain being encrypted. And we know a lot of times when you're handling in-house IT and you're implementing a new project, it's just easier to give everybody admin access. That's just the reality of it. And so now everything's encrypted, and the only email you could open, again, here's this pretty red screen from Kevin. All right, pay me some ransom, I'll encrypt all of this for you. Now imagine you're trying to get access to a file or a presentation that you have, and everything's encrypted. There is a need for backup. There's actually a video of him doing this presentation. If anybody wants it, I can get your hands on it. But it's pretty interesting to see it in action. But again, the overall theme here is, we live in a fast-paced society. Any minute that you're down, you don't have access is extremely frustrating. You know that. If you're looking at days or weeks of not having access, a lot of businesses just can't survive that. City of Baltimore is not going to go out of business. They can go sell off some new muni bonds or raise their mill rate or whatever they need to do. Businesses don't have that ability. And you got to think to yourself, can I absorb a week of downtime, 16.2 days of downtime? Would I fill into that $300,000 impact, and can I survive that? And then beyond that, when you're looking at regulations and things like that, and we saw the statement from the government, all of these compliance issues, what they're really doing is they're not helping to stop any of these guys. They're not helping to catch any of them either. They're shifting that burden over to you and saying, you better be doing everything in your power to protect your data, your client data, your employee data. Because if you don't, even if you recover, we're going to come knocking on your door. You better be able to show me a disaster recovery plan to make sure that you've been doing and checking off all those boxes. So, scary stuff. I do think, the good news is we got a lot of really smart folks on the IT side, and there's a lot of ways that you can go and protect that data. You look towards that, David, he's got a whole stack of products that would integrate with one another beyond backup. Hopefully none of these folks get through, but if they do, let's get some, get you back up and running as quickly as possible. So the chat box is open. Everybody's muted, but if you do have any questions, the chat box is open. While I'm looking at those, David, do you have any parting thoughts? We do have a really good question coming in. If attack data was backed up, why isn't the harm caused by the attack overcome by recovery the data from backup? Is it because the malware is still in the system? Yeah, that malware is going to sit on your system until you get rid of it. It's going to lay dormant. That's another reason some folks pay and don't realize they didn't do any remediation. That virus is just laying dormant. It's just going to pop up again. So yes, that's one of the things that you need to do, and that's why the downtime occurs. And these criminals are going in and trying to infect those backups because they know that they infect some of your previous backups, and it's a traditional form of backup that might be layered upon previous backups. But you're not going to be able to restore that data because the backups are encrypted as well. Just to speak to the business continuity aspect, I mentioned everything being independent of one another. It's called an inverse chain. So what we would be able to do is delete that encrypted backup and then point out, here's the last clean backup. In terms of the data centers, data is encrypted, military-grade encryption in transit and at rest, and it's what's called an immutable cloud, which means that nobody has access to change that data. It's not even folks at Datto. We don't have access to change the data in an immutable cloud. So, another homework assignment, go Google what that means. But, that's the key part here. So, yes, you're going to go and you're going to recover that data. It's the speed in which you can do that and the ability to say that those backups aren't infected as well. So, great question.
And I'd like to thank Fred Rubin for that question. He is one of our clients, and I just wanted to say to everyone, especially our clients, that we have a full security stack. So a lot of those issues, fortunately, our clients have been protected. But there's many people out there, as you point out, Michael, that don't get the message. You can try to educate and talk to your blue in the face, but until something happens and you feel the pain, that's generally when people want to make a change. Would you agree?
Yeah, exactly. I hear it all the time that gets presented and then they get attacked. And hey, remember you talked to me about that product, and it's kind of too late. So proactiveness and agility really is the key to any kind of cyber resilience plan.
I like to, and maybe I'm getting ahead of you, and I don't know how much time we have, but I would like to know from people if, I know my clients probably are taking precautions, but there's probably people out there who are listening now who maybe they're not. And I'd like to know if they are, and if they are, what are they doing? And if they have backups, are they testing them? Because a backup is only as good as if it works. So if it's not a good backup, you're out of luck too.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to that user error. You want those testings to be done automatically and automated, because you don't want Jim down the hall to be responsible for taking the backups. And I did a webinar last week, and we asked a poll, how are you backing up your data? And there's about 60 people on this webinar. 33% were backing up with tape. Not only is there a lot of risk of those backups not being there when you need it, but restoring from tape is time consuming. So again, you got to know how bad. Yeah, I'm sure you're a little surprised by that figure, David, but that's a true story. 33% of these folks.
I'm trying to pick myself up off the floor, actually.
I would as well. I told the partner, call those people right now,
Yeah, really.
right after this webinar.
Good client. You
Another
said
good question coming in about detecting the ransom, because that's critical to be able to proactively detect it. Because maybe that scary red screen doesn't pop up right away, and now it's laying dormant in your system. With business continuity and Datto specifically, we're able to detect that ransomware because, not to get too technical on it, but I mentioned, setting up that schedule. All that's happening is we're taking the block level incremental changes that are occurring. So not taking full backups of your system every hour, or whatever that schedule is. And what that allows us to do is not only create that inverse chain that we talked about, but we're able to look at, okay, those backups are going along, data changes are relatively similar. When a ransomware attack occurs, regardless of the variant, it's going to jump off the screen because now every single file and folder is now changed. They've all been encrypted. And an alert is immediately going to go off to David and his team and say, hey, this is the footprint that ransomware leaves. Take a look at this. Maybe it's a false positive. Maybe you did need to take a full backup or whatever it is, but it's about being proactive, and it's going to also indicate the last clean backup where we didn't see that. So that's all happening automatically on every single backup. It's detecting not individual variants because there's so many out there, it's almost impossible to keep up with them. But ultimately on the ransomware side, they all leave the same footprint. And the techs had a blast doing this because they actually were sitting in a sandbox infecting all these networks with actual ransomware viruses to set up this system. So they got to play hacker for a couple of weeks. They love that. But great question. Yes, this is automatically detecting the footprint that ransomware leaves.
And you do make a really good point. You have to make a choice. Are you going to be proactive or are you going to be reactive? I kind of see us as the smoke detector people, and we're not the fire company. We're not putting out fires. So when do you want to deal with this issue? Do you want to deal with it before it happens and protect downtime? Or do you want to wait and then we're picking up the pieces and putting out the fire?
I mean, that's a fantastic analogy. It really is. When you look at your annual IT budget, do you want it to be predictable and you say, okay, this is what my IT budget is going to be, but monthly basis? Or do you want it to be a roller coaster of, hey, January, that IT budget might be low, but we got some project work coming up out of nowhere, and it could be $30,000 to go remediate this. It's really, it's like insurance. You want to wait until an attack occurs and gamble that, or do you want to say, okay, I'll pay a monthly fee on that? But I love your analogy there, David.
Well, thank you. Because I think as a company, we've matured to the point where we're professionals. We know what's best for you. We can't afford not to present to you and to provide to you the best in breed technology, because otherwise we're just chucking the truck, as I like to say. And that's the guy or gal who's running around and putting out all these fires and may not even be available to help you, whereas we're there 24/7, a single pane of glass, where, as you pointed out, we get the alerts. Hey, it might be a false positive, but I'd rather get a false positive than a disaster.
Exactly. And, we have some studies also on the business community and how they are, managing their IT. And a lot, 7 in 10 are still managing it all in-house. And that might have been easy to do 10 years ago when you only worked with a few IT vendors. The complexity of what IT looks like now, I mean, it's almost impossible to be able to keep up with that as a business owner or as an in-house IT person who is managing everything else. Folks like, David, they're vetting all of these new vendors. I can tell you, I'm doing virtual trade shows now, and there are new security vendors popping up every single month, and they're all great. But how do you vet them, and how do you know this isn't just the flashy flavor of the month, and does it integrate with all your other systems? That's really where the strength of working with David would be, is saying, okay, every single person's got a different system in place. People ask me after these webinars, all right, what do I need? I can't answer that question unless I know a lot of more information about your systems. And so that's where that assessment comes in. I think that's critical. Maybe just a quick gap analysis, or maybe the peace of mind that, hey, we're in shape.
Well, that brings us to the point in the webinar where I wanted to just invite those who are listening to contact me. First of all, I'd like to offer a free evaluation or review of your systems and get an idea of what is going on in the back end of your uh, business critical systems and network. I like to also talk to you about and help you create a business continuity plan. Obviously, part of that's just the planning, because if you don't plan, then you have nothing. But and then you got to act on it. And thirdly, because I feel very generous today, I'm also going to give everyone a dark web evaluation as well. I'll be able to put your domain into one of our vendors' systems, and I'll be able to tell you if you are vulnerable or not, if your information's being sold or traded on the dark web, which is always my eye-opening, because a lot of people say to me, Michael, oh, we don't put anything personal on our systems. And the next thing you know, I can tell them what their social security number is or their birth date. So it's not true. And, so I'll leave it at that. I love to talk to people, about these issues and solve problems and prevent problems. And that's why we do what we do. And, happy to discuss these things with you. So I'll give it back to you, Michael.
Yeah, I'll wrap up with this is not a question, but a great statement. You can say the author of that great question previously highly recommends David Applebaum. And if you happen to reside in Yardley, PA, vote for him.
Yes, all right. The secret's out of the bag. I am running for mayor of Yardley Borough. So even if you don't live here, I'm sure there's ways that we can hack the system. And
there you go. Well, I'll tell you, David, I spent 4 years doing political consulting, so maybe we have a different conversation offline. I can help you out there.
Oh, that would be fun. But in all seriousness, I'd like to thank my fans, particularly Fred. He's he's a great guy, great lawyer, and I really, it's those kind of comments that really keep me going, because, I could say that I just do this for the money and feed my family, but the truth is I actually enjoy doing this. And I think you too, Michael, come across as someone that actually enjoys what you're doing. And that's the best kind of teacher, because if you're not, enthusiastic, then you're not going to get the point across. And it's just sad to me that those numbers you gave, that I don't think that's going to happen here on this call, but on other calls, 30% of the people are going to walk away and not do anything.
Yeah, 70%. Yeah,
70%. Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, now I'm really upset.
Yeah, 7 out of 10 are going to say, "All right, sounds good, David. I'll call you next year," and they'll call you in 6 months when their systems are down.
And we all know how well that works out.
Yeah, of course. There's a reason why these guys are multi-billionaires, and unfortunately, the best and the brightest tend to go to the dark side. But that's a different conversation. But David, I really appreciate you including us on this. This was good. I mean, I think we had some really good conversation here. And anybody wants any of those stories or slides, feel free to reach out to David. I can get you whatever you want, or if you want to take a look at that Kevin Mitnick video, as I'm sure you guys are all Googling who he is and reading the stories. They should make a movie. They've written books about him, but interesting guy.
Thank you, Michael. We certainly appreciate you and the time you've given us today.
Awesome. All right, everybody, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.